Welcome to ILTV Insider. I'm your host, Executive Editor Maayan Hoffman. It's been nearly 21 months since the war with Hamas began. Thousands dead on both sides, dozens still held hostage, and pressure mounting both at home and abroad. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump is pushing hard for a ceasefire deal that could bring 50 hostages home. But is that the right move? Tonight we ask the big questions. Can Israel afford to stop now? What happens if we don't? And could a ceasefire collapse the Netanyahu government? To help us unpack it all, I'm joined by veteran journalists Ruthie Blum and Dan Perry. Let's dive in. Dan, I want to start with you. It's very simple. We've been fighting for nearly 21 months. And all of a sudden, in a social media post by President Donald Trump, we hear, sign the deal now, get the hostages home. Netanyahu is scheduled to go to Washington next week to talk about this potential deal. Is it the time to stop the war? Should we sign a ceasefire deal?
Absolutely.
Why?
This war brings diminishing returns, and every day that passes is the continuation of a cataclysm that brings little benefit to Israel, risks the lives of soldiers, causes the deaths of more and more hostages, and, by the way, continues what is an absolute disaster for the people of Gaza. It's not much discussed in Israel, sadly, but tens of thousands have died. People continue to die there. It is just a disaster. It was always clear from the beginning that Israel had the ability to get the hostages freed if it gave in to Hamas's terms. Hamas's terms in the beginning were basically end the war immediately and leave us in power and don't punish us for October 7th. I think even though from the beginning it meant sacrificing some hostages, and this is a very cruel calculus, the majority of the people of Israel agreed with the government that on day 2 of the war, it was unacceptable. That was always going to flip. At that time, very few of the people that agreed, essentially, and it's horrible to say it, but to risk the lives of hostages to achieve other strategic aims in degrading Hamas and removing Hamas, wouldn't have wanted to do that for 6 months. They would not have wanted to do that for a year, not for a year and a half. I think if we had known from the beginning, and by the way, it was predictable in my view, that 21 months later, Hamas will be degraded but still hanging on to the remains of what remains in Gaza, we would have said, yeah, by that point we end the war. We're well past that point. And there is definitely a humane, logical, a strategic scenario to do that with great benefits for Israel.
So, Dan, that makes, all makes sense what you're saying. But remember that the 3 goals that we set out at the beginning of the war were, number 1, to bring the hostages home. That would achieve that goal. Number 2, however, was to demolish or dismantle Hamas both politically and militarily. And the 3rd was to create security for the Gaza border, that Gaza would no longer be a threat if we would sign a ceasefire today. It sounds like goals 2 and 3 would not be achieved. Ruthie, do you agree with Dan?
No. Yes and no. Okay? I'll tell you why no. First of all, I think it's really important to reiterate, though we've said this before, that there were originally 251 hostages, and now there are 50. In other words, 200 have been retrieved, rescued, or freed by Hamas or through a deal. Okay? Second, every single death in Gaza, and that is soldiers, Palestinians, whoever, every single one injury is on Hamas's hands. That's very important because, the narrative gets distorted and it's all, well, the soldiers killed this many. There would be no dead Palestinians in Gaza if not for Hamas. If not for Hamas, not only the October 7th massacre, but everything before that and everything since then. Including stealing all the aid that was aimed at the civilians in Gaza and those who are hungry. Hamas is not hungry, okay? They've got ice cream parlors and all kinds of stuff going on over there. It's many, many people who are, and now with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or Fund, even they are under attack by Hamas and by the UN, according to the head of that.
But should we sign the ceasefire?
So, first of all, what ceasefire deal? There is none. Let me put it this way. Trump posted, get them home now. Sign a deal and get them home now. He did not say Israel signed a deal. We know he wants a deal. Everybody wants a deal. Everyone wants all the hostages home, except Hamas, of course. So what deal? If we say to them, give us all the hostages and then we'll let you live. They're not going to do it. They're still on the, well, we agreed to Witkoff's this, and Israel will leave, and then we'll give you some hostages. they are not just murderers, they're also liars, of course. So now, if it weren't for those 50, and if it weren't for the fact that the Israeli government, it constantly blamed for this, cared about every individual life, they would have abandoned the hostages and blitzed the crap out of Gaza without, indiscriminately is what I'm saying. And the whole reason that we're not doing that is to safeguard them, the hostages.
Right, there are certainly areas we have not gone into as a result of the fact that the hostages are there.
The idea that the army is going light because they don't want to hurt the hostages is partly true, but at this point...
Is partly not.
Looks a little ridiculous.
Well, I mean, I think
if you look at
March.
before and after scenes, satellite pictures even, of the cities, of the towns of Gaza, the place has been obliterated to the tune of about 40% of the buildings. Tens of thousands of civilians have been killed. This goes on and on and on.
Well,
there's no way to say that Israel went light.
Well, that's
now, it's
not
true
really,
that they didn't completely flatten it.
No, there are certain areas that the military said they did not enter because they believe that's where the hostages are being held.
And it's also true that released hostages have said that we feared mostly Israeli bombardment. And the military came pretty close and probably did kill a bunch of Israel's own hostages. Look, it's not really true that there's no deal to be signed. And Hamas is, I agree they're liars, but there's a point where you have to see the picture accurately.
So,
Hamas is, I'd like to describe the deal that I think is possible.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Please describe what is reasonable.
Fine. So from the beginning, Hamas said, go away, leave us alone, let us claim victory. We'll give you back the hostages, and also we need a whole bunch of terrorists from your prisons. And that was a deal. And Israel refused that deal, and as I say, with support of the public on day one. Right now, they had about 75% probably the public no longer supports this, and they want to do the deal. What is the deal? Yeah, end the war, release a bunch of terrorists, get back all the hostages, put aside, Ruthie, put aside the question of whether they'll really release them. Maybe they'll play some games, but that is the deal. And end the war. And basically, leave Hamas there. Now, Israel can demand more. And Hamas has already told Qatar and Egypt that they don't want to rule Gaza anymore, and they'd be happy for the PA to come. So point number one, Israel has to accept the PA brand, because there's no other brand. All right? Reformed, improved, with assistance from others. Hamas is insisting on not disarming, meaning what they want to do is a Lebanon-like, anti-war, Lebanon-like scenario where they're Hezbollah controlling, in effect, in a mafia way, whatever civilian government comes in their place. This Israel rightly rejects. And it's going to come to this. Now, people who say the deal is impossible basically say Hamas will never acquiesce. And I say, you know what, okay. Because at that point, you get back the hostages. Hamas has been quite crushed. Gaza is in a state of utter misery. Present two scenarios to the Palestinian people. One, fine, we'll build a wall a mile high and you won't be able to invade again, and nothing will go in, and there'll be minimal humanitarian aid that goes in. And by the way, people who want to leave at that point, which is humane, would be allowed to leave, and many would. And the Arabs have to play along with this to agree that they can leave and go somewhere. But that would be one scenario, quite bad for the Palestinians, although good for those who leave Gaza. The other would be Hamas disarms, as Mahmoud Abbas, head of the PA, has demanded. And its leaders are allowed to go into exile, what's left of them. And if that happens, then there will be a massive regional and global effort to rebuild Gaza and to come as close as possible to making it a beautiful resort in Singapore. And there really is about $100 billion, pretty much in escrow in the Gulf, waiting to be handed to them, but not if Hamas is there. And it's attractive. And at that point, with the entire Arab League behind this, with Iran, I hope, no longer able to help them, with Hezbollah also thrashed in Lebanon, and with probably polls showing that 90% of the Palestinians want this, the pressure on Hamas may be such that as a political movement, it actually might work. It's certainly worth trying.
Ruthie?
Okay, so first of all, it's a nice fantasy, and I would agree with that.
Why not try
I don't
it?
see it. No, I don't disagree that you should try.
And you get back the hostages?
As for the billions in escrow, it's also interesting that all these years, how many billions have been poured into rehabilitating Gaza? That part is nonsense.
It went to Hamas.
Never was. Exactly.
And what was promised was never actually delivered.
Let me finish, please.
Okay, number two. Why aren't all those countries who are saying we'll rebuild? and not wanting to take in Palestinians from Gaza. That's another thing. You have to, you have to be realistic about the players involved. It's not just a challenge. They don't want them. Otherwise, Egypt could have, for humanitarian reasons, taken in tons of Gaza.
Well, there's an answer.
Okay, and the same thing with the Gulf, the same thing with all the Arab countries. They don't want them, and Jordan certainly doesn't want them. But let's put it this way. I think my fantasy,
because that's a critically important point.
Okay, but you have a fantasy. Here's my fantasy. My fantasy is that Netanyahu is going to Washington on Monday. We know that. That's not a fantasy. And that what he says to him is, look, just as we signed a ceasefire deal with Hezbollah, and since then we've been blitzing them because they're still engaging in terrorism, building tunnels, moving weapons, and that's what we called our ceasefire, but not if they're rebuilding. And Iran, Trump has also said to Iran, one false move, we're going to go back in there. So my fantasy is that Netanyahu is saying to Trump, we got to make some kind of deal where we get all the hostages. And 5 minutes after that, one movement in Gaza, one gun moves from one place to the other, we're back in there. And now we don't have to worry about the hostages.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Hold on,
I need to ask.
That's not a fantasy. Everyone agrees with that.
No, but there's a very big question mark with that, because there's a very big difference between Lebanon and Iran versus Gaza. In Lebanon, we're working with the Lebanese government. Hezbollah, whether they're effective or ineffective, we have a partner in Lebanon. Iran is a state. Gaza is ruled by a terrorist organization. How, Ruthie, do we, make these kind of deals with a terrorist organization? Oh, you can go back in, you cannot go back in. In fact, what are you going to be changing? You fake them out is what you do. They're terrorists. We don't owe them anything, okay? They're bloodthirsty murderers. What we do is we say, on the other hand, they have a gun to the head of the hostages. So we pull one on them. We pull a fast one on them. We don't owe them anything. As you say, they're not a country. They don't have a proper government. We make some kind of deal that somehow that enables us to rescue those hostages, and then the deal's off.
But it wouldn't be even a fast one. And
it would,
and what you described. First of all, you can't pull a fast one and announce it on TV, which, by the way, which everyone's doing.
No.
So my guess is,
I'm announcing it, but I have no power. So.
They may be murderous terrorists who, by the way, don't care about the lives of themselves.
But they're not stupid. They carried out October 7.
It doesn't matter, because that would be quite in the open. It's not a fast one. The idea would be that there are certain terms, and a ceasefire is dependent on those terms. And they would agree to that, in my estimation, but they insist, for now, on staying there as what's left of an armed force. That's the bit that will be a challenge. I agree with Ruthie that the idea that as part of the incentivizing of the Palestinians to compel Hamas to agree to disarm in Gaza, there needs to be an allowing of some people to leave Gaza simply because it will not be being rebuilt. They have nowhere to live. Right. That is a challenge, because the Arab countries are not prepared to receive 1 million Palestinians. It's overcomable. The mere threat of that is enough to compel political movement in Palestinian public opinion. And by the way, I think you will find, and Egypt has already suggested, that they'll take in limited numbers. Saudi Arabia will take in numbers, because what you have here is a very complex equation where these countries want certain things. Saudi Arabia wants a civilian nuclear program. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries want a strategic umbrella with the U.S. that might include Israel. Many of the Gulf countries, quite impressed by Israel's jaw-dropping success in Iran, understand that Israel is right now something close to military hegemon. They want a strategic deal that includes Israel, the U.S., and implicitly NATO. There's a lot to play with here.
So Dan, let's talk about that, because I was looking at some of the plans that have been leaked, with regards to what might or might not be in the ceasefire deal. And one of the big components, of course, is not only Syria potentially joining the Abraham Accords, which is amazing, but even before Lebanon, right? And of course, Saudi Arabia. Do you think that that's enough of incentive? And I just think back to 2020 when we signed the original Abraham Accords, and how at that time, if you remember, with Donald Trump in office the first time, and everybody was touting sovereignty, and we're going to have sovereignty, and it was given up in literally a heartbeat in order to get that regional deal. And here too, we've got these goals of the war, but could we give them up to get those strategic alliances? Because as you said, that would change the region.
Well, first of all, yes. There's always a deal to be done, and there's trade-offs in any deal. But I don't think Israel would be giving anything up. The initial aims of the war were not achievable. there was a contradiction between eradicating Hamas, which, as Ruthie rightly says, would mean carpet bombing Gaza, which is inhumane, and rescuing the hostages because you'd be killing them as well. Israel couldn't even flood the tunnels for fear of killing the hostages. What was achievable has been achieved. And the military has made it rather clear to the government. And my guess is that if Trump pressures Netanyahu in their trip in their visit next week, there's a pretty good chance that, as I'm sure Ruthie will agree, I know she will agree, that would be collusion, because Netanyahu needs Trump's pressure as political cover vis-a-vis his rather disastrous coalition. And none of them should worry, because the Israeli opposition in this scenario that we're all describing, and Ruthie may think it's less likely than I think, and I think we probably agree it's worth trying. In this scenario, there is such an advantage that the opposition in Israel would prop up Netanyahu. He has nothing to fear. It might even make him electable again.
Well, let me ask you a question, Ruthie, because I did hear, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich say just yesterday that absolutely not. This current government would potentially fall. Now, maybe you're right. We could build up another government. But what do you think would be the results? And I also want to ask you, as a follow-up to that, if you don't mind answering both, regionally, what kind of message will it send? If a rogue terrorist organization, this is not even as large as Iran, not as powerful as Hezbollah, manages to survive Israel's attacks?
That is a huge problem, and it's not just that it manages to survive, but it encourages the taking of hostages all over the place. And that's one thing we cannot allow. Now, you mentioned the sovereignty that Israel said, okay, fine, once we sign the Abraham Accords, fine, we'll give up on sovereignty in the meantime. For a window, exactly. I would even agree with that, with such a thing, if there were a regional peace and more Abraham Accords. Of course you're giving up something. But if in the end what you're giving up is, first of all, releasing all those horrific terrorists in exchange for 50 innocent people, 30 of whom are presumed dead, then what you're doing is you're just saying, it doesn't matter who you are, what you are, it doesn't matter what rogue organization you are, just go around and kidnap people.
Ruthie, you really wouldn't do it? I don't believe it.
I would do it. No, wait. I would do it on condition. No, but you see, on condition. I said this again and again, that we do what we're doing in Lebanon, which is to say, we'll do it. And 5 minutes later, one false move, and we are bombing again, or with troops on the ground again.
Absolutely understood.
Okay, then we agree on that.
We agree, absolutely.
Well, agreement. I don't know. We should end the show.
And by the way, you're right. If the remains of Hamas remain somehow and don't disarm in the first phase I've described, they'll claim victory. After pretty much every one of their major leaders has been assassinated, after the unbelievable punishment that was delivered unto, I'm sad to say, it's so inhumane, the people that they claim to represent, after most of their units have been dismantled. This kind of victory, I wish upon my enemies such a victory. It is laughable and pitiable, and it's a little reminiscent of Ali Khamenei, whose skies were controlled by Israel for 12 days, claiming victory because he isn't dead. It really is pathetic.
What role do you think Iran plays in all of this? Do you feel that this is really, with 12 days we fought this war, Trump, again, posted on social media, and voila, there was a ceasefire agreement the next morning. Now, obviously, there were some things going on behind the scenes, but do you really think that that's what it is? We're building on the momentum of Iran. Iran now feels like we feel that we're a superpower. The world feels we're a superpower. Now is the time to get this done. How much is this factoring in?
Well, I think it's very important that we take a deep breath every time President Trump posts something on social media, and the same every time Netanyahu says something. Why do we need to take a deep breath? Because, for example, when Trump said, okay, there's a ceasefire, everybody, my first instinct was to say, oh no, we didn't finish, to get nervous. And then I thought about it, because he said, no, we're stopping. We accomplished what we set out to accomplish, and that's great. And Iran, again, I turn to you. You want to make a deal with us? You want to behave yourself, et cetera, et cetera. And then Khamenei said Trump is a snake, or whatever he said, and Trump said, okay, again, we can do this the nice way or the hard way. And so then I calmed down, because I know that, and probably this job is not finished, but it sent such a signal to the world and to the Arab world. Yes, there's that they need to know which strong horse to tie themselves to. And now they know it's America again and Israel again. And that's why it did immense benefit for the Middle East and the whole world. And again, as long as Hamas realizes that its days are numbered, however you look at it, and that whatever it does, okay, we'll go back in again. And if it were not for the hostages, this war would have been over, okay? And that is the trouble. You cannot signal to all these rogue terrorist organizations that all they have to do is kidnap, and then they win. That's a huge problem.
So, Dan, I want to turn to you for a second with regards to Iran, and just, piggybacking on what Ruthie was talking about in terms of the idea that they can have the hard way, the easy way. How much do you feel that we're going to have to go back, just as a last comment, to fight Iran? Because Avigdor Lieberman, the MK former defense minister, said just today that he believes we're going to be back fighting Iran within the next 3 years. Final comments, you believe that's true?
It's conceivable. The answer to your question involves predicting what the regime will do, and indeed, will it survive the undoubted reckoning that it soon will face internally. Revolutions generally actually are palace coups. I would expect at some point a palace coup in Iran where the military and even the Revolutionary Guard overthrow these theological maniacs who have hijacked the country and are running it in a way that is alien to the Persian people. Momentum is not logical, and psychology is not logical, but both are important. The psychology right now favors this pro-Western regional deal that we are all envisioning. The momentum is with Israel because of the strategic success that was undeniable and rather, it's dumbfounding, displayed in Iran.
It'll be a great movie.
Yeah, and it will be, I'm sure. So absolutely, everything connects now. And what needs to happen, I think, is for the U.S. to insist on talks with Iran, where in order, basically for allowing the regime to survive and not attacking them again at some point, as you say, certain things are going to have to change, and that's not just a disavowal of the nuclear program and also of the ballistic missile program, but also of the absolutely outrageous interference with the sovereignty of most other countries in the region, including the Palestinian Authority with Hamas, and Lebanon with Hezbollah, and Yemen with the Houthis, and Syria where they propped up Assad. All of that needs to end. And if Iran is compelled, whether in promise or in fact, to stop supporting Hamas, that will be part of pressuring Hamas.
And that brings us right back to Hamas. So I think we're going to end the show because we are out of time, unfortunately, tonight. I want to really thank both you, Dan, and you, Ruthie, for being here tonight. And thanks to all of our guests who are watching. For the latest news and analysis from Israel, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv. This is Insider. Stay informed, stay strong, and may we find both victory and a lasting path to peace in the Middle East.